who saw these incidents, and out of mercy, we left the army personnel to go who were in these tanks. Now the people took possession of these tanks and cleared the two cities, both Yisrin and Zintan. I also witnessed negotiations between the civilians and the army personnel. The army personnel withdrew in peace without any conflict. This happened 3 days ago. Other cities about 40 kilometers from Yisrin, there exists a huge battalion. It is called the Western Mountain Battalion. It is led by the Al-Qaddafi loyalists. I cannot recall his name. He is from AlJazeera tribe. I called my fellow citizens there, and they told me this fierceful battalion came under attack from the civilians. Many young men fell dead, were killed, and the number of injured is not accounted for yet. It is not the first time for martyrs to fall.
And how are you coping with all those injuries? What are people doing for help?
As a matter of fact, here, our cities are now calm simply because there are not any factories or industrial facilities. As you know, the geographical location of Libya is very vast. Only the Gharian in the western province is industrial. That's why the army deployed heavily there. The two cities of Yisrin and Zintan are a little bit light compared to them. Intelligence and army are heavily deployed in this Gharian.
But you're okay for food, for water, for medical supplies, law and order?
As a matter of fact, we, the Libyans, are used to years and years of embargo and sanctions. We are used to living under harsh conditions. That's why every household has its own rations and reserves. And also, we took preparations when the revolution erupted in Egypt. And that's why many of the household families are keeping reserves for months to come. And as I told you, many of the mountainous areas rose against Al-Qaddafi. And 15 minutes ago, I called my telephone. He came from other cities who confirmed that they are all under the total control of the people. Other intelligence services and military services are receding and withdrawing gradually.
You obviously want these protests to continue until Muammar Gaddafi steps down. Do you want the international community to do anything to help? What do you want to see the international community to do?
We do not wish for any international intervention to take place. We cannot see Libya to be a second Iraq. We do not wish the international community to intervene. I am a countryman, and I don't want... As I told you, I was in Al-Zintan city. Over the past 40 years, Al-Qaddafi used to drive wedges between our tribes and the other Arab citizens. I came from the city. We have been co-living together, and it turned out for us to prove that we are one people sharing the same country and the same destiny. It was Al-Qaddafi who was driving a wedge between us. We are one people. We are having a shared language and a shared religion as well.
الآن في الأمريكان الموجودين في فرنسا وهولندا، ونحن شعوب آمنا بالإسلام ولم نتراجع على هذا الكلام، وبالتالي العرب احنا نعظم فيهم اخوتنا وائمتنا.
That's why we consider our Arabs to be our fellow citizens without any discrimination. As to Tripoli, I called my brothers there in Tripoli, and my brothers were in Tripoli after a Friday sermons. They took to the streets and they were faced by Al-Qaddafi mercenaries stationed around mosques. They were firing guns indiscriminately. A number of young youth were arrested, but I cannot give you exact numbers, and I cannot give you names either. Those arrested, I know them personally. My brothers also came under heavy gunfire. They took refuge. My second brother is still missing. I cannot establish communication with him. As I told you, Al-Qaddafi's mercenaries were stationed around most of the mosques in Tripoli. But I can assure you that protesters took to the streets in huge numbers, at least thousands. Now they are distributed in a perimeter of 70 kilometers around Tripoli. And as you know, the population in Tripoli is not very intense. Pockets of demonstrations are everywhere in Tripoli, which is causing a great deal of confusion to the intelligence and security apparatuses affiliated to Al-Qaddafi.
Okay, well, I hope that you get in contact with your brother who you can't reach in Tripoli there. Thank you very much indeed for speaking with us. So clearly a lot of events unfolding on the ground in Libya. Our contributor on the phone there telling us about pockets of resistance around Tripoli, clashes with police there. Let's cross to the border with Egypt in the east. Jamal El-Shayal joins us from Saloum, which is just inside Egypt. Jamal, I don't know if you could hear our guest there. I asked him about whether Libyans wanted the international community to intervene in what's happening here, and he said no, because Libyans are a proud people and want to sort their own problems out. Do you think, what do you think Libyans want to see from the West?
Well, definitely, surely the sentiment is they do not want direct intervention in terms of international forces or in terms of foreign troops on their land, but what they do say is that a lot of the money, a lot of the support that Gaddafi and his family have is because they are doing business with the West. So, for example, up to 70% of oil, of Libyan oil is sold to Europe. If you look at the bank accounts of Gaddafi and the Gaddafi family, they are scattered across Western countries and assets in Switzerland and in Britain and in other countries. And it was only when people like former British Prime Minister Tony Blair and other Western diplomats kind of brought Gaddafi back into the fold of the international community that you suddenly saw this surge in riches by the Libyan leader, and it is that they believe emboldened him to think that he could get away with things. Because if we remember Gaddafi's first speech and also his son Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's first speech, they specifically threatened things like oil and other things which they believe gives them an upper hand to any threats or any calls of caution or force to heed the calls from the West, because they believe that it is the West that needs them more than the other way around. And therefore, a lot of the Libyans believe that it was only when business has stopped with Gaddafi and when the Western powers and Western governments refused to buy Libyan oil in order to ensure that Gaddafi no longer has some sort of income, that they will be able to eventually overcome the person they picked as a tyrant and come out victorious, truly.
And just briefly, Jamal, difficult to get information out of Tripoli and what's happening there, but people coming across the border must be extremely worried about events unfolding there.
Indeed, literally just a couple of minutes ago as we were waiting to go on air, someone came running to me and he said, please, please, I deplore you. I have 4 brothers in Tripoli. I can't get through to any of them. And a lot of these are, it's often that as we're standing here literally just at the border, so we are amongst the first, if not the first media that people see as they come across. And they come with either horrific tales or pleas to the outside world that they have family members or friends stranded inside Tripoli and other western areas of the country that they have been unable to get hold of. And this has been a common reoccurrence throughout the past few days. And this is why it is so important for there to be some sort of freedom of the media and freedom of the press inside the country, which up until now there hasn't been any. In fact, in some circumstances we've heard of some being targeted, and that's why this message that's essentially being delivered by the average person who's lucky enough to come through the border is so important.
Jamal, thanks very much indeed for that. Jamal Al-Shael reporting from Saloum, just over the border with Libya there. It is 14 GMT. It's the top of the hour. You're joining us with our extended coverage of the protests taking place across the Middle East. I'm Shuli Ghosh. Let's take you through the top stories. Tens of thousands of Libyans are holding mass protests after Friday prayers. There have been demonstrations in the east. We're getting news of gunfire in the capital, Tripoli. At least 5 people have died there, according to reports. More Libyan diplomats have resigned. The country's ambassador to France and the UN agency UNESCO are said to have quit their posts. Comes amidst growing international pressure on Muammar Gaddafi's regime. The UN Security Council is holding an emergency meeting to discuss possible sanctions later on Friday. Now, foreigners are continuing to be evacuated from Libya. A US chartered ferry carrying over 300 people, many of them Americans, has now left Tripoli for Malta. Now, a lot of demonstrations elsewhere. These are pictures from Iraq, where protests against government corruption and poor living conditions have been taking place in cities across the country. Some violence between protesters and riot police has broken out in Baghdad. At least 2 people have been killed in the northern city of Hawija. Also, tens of thousands of government loyalists have taken to the streets of Yemen's capital, Sana'a, in a show of support for President Ali Abdullah Saleh. It comes as a surge of pro- and anti-government rallies take place across the country. Pro-democracy activists have dubbed Friday the beginning of the end for President Saleh, who's been in power since 1978.